Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm Patricia Kong. I'll be hosting today's podcast, and with me, I have professional Scrum trainer John O'Reilly. Hello, John.
Hi, Patricia.
Hey, John, the story that we wanted to share today in the podcast was out of our work and our conversations that I feel have been a little bit quiet these days in the agile industry, and it was about software development, software delivery. So we were talking about delivery, development, what does it mean, craftsmanship, all those topics. And one of the stories that you shared with me, your recent experiences that got you onto the pod was about a non-software based experience in Scrum. So today we're going to go through that, and I am really excited that you're going to share that with us.
Well, thanks. Yes, it's actually a very exciting effort. So thank you for allowing me to share this.
Cool. So one of the things I must say that grabbed me quickly. So we're talking about something that's going on in non-software, and we'll go through the details. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was, one, these people were interested, knew about Scrum, and I think you can go into why that really spoke to them and their experience. But the goals and the missions that you pointed out really spoke to me. So the mission that you said this company had, and this was in construction materials, so really different than software delivery in terms of just the materials, but their mission was to beat Mother Nature. What does that mean?
Yeah, actually, that was our product owner's vision. So the vision was to beat Mother Nature. And so I was intrigued immediately when he was telling me that. And basically, what he was really concentrating on was 3D printed houses. So the problem was that 3D printed houses, you can basically put them up very quickly and very cheaply compared to anything that is manufactured. And the problem, though, is that it still requires a solid foundation, and some of these foundations can crack or erode very quickly. And so that was what he was telling me as his story. And what I got to do is I got to tell him about the Scrum framework and how we could create value very quickly through iterative development. And I was talking about the software context of it, and he said, well, can this be used in non-software? And my answer was, well, yes, it's actually designed to do that as well, but I have never actually tried it. So that was the motivation for both of us to start to go into business together.
Oh, double chances. He was like, you know Scrum, but you've never tried this, and we'll see what happens. So this was during the pandemic, right? That's another complexity.
Yes. So we actually got started and got funding and everything rolling kind of in the middle of the pandemic. So that was kind of another motivator for us, in that no one else was working, and everyone was staying home. So yeah, that was another motivator.
Did you guys meet in person or?
Yeah, we
virtually?
actually, so we met in person. So we were all masked up and everything, but part of the advantage was that our main site was a construction site in the middle of downtown Columbus. And so we still had to practice our social distancing and all that kind of stuff, but it was a lot easier since we were outside.
Yeah,
So,
Columbus, Ohio, because you guys have funny land in Ohio. Very.
Yes. Yeah. Columbus, Central Ohio, is very much a test market for a lot of things. And so, yeah, our land is quite unique in the United States. And so it was a great test ground.
Right. So beat Mother Nature, that was the mission. They have funding, they're going in, and there was a goal that you talked about, which was around building materials, building revolutionary material. What was that about?
Yeah, so the actual what it turned up to be the product goal was to come up with a revolutionary building material. So that was the actual product goal, non-specific. and very, very much speaking to all of us, but being very vague at the same time. So it was very interesting.
So that makes sense to them. So now you're like when you're just like, here's this thing, this Scrum framework, and we need a goal. What do you want to do? And it's not going to be, we're not sure if we're going to be able to hit it. It's not, is this, I would imagine the type of people who are working in construction, and you're talking about some very scientific things. They want things to be precise and exact. Did they get the notion of all this theory you're spewing?
Yeah, well, that's kind of interesting that you bring that up because our team, the developers, were, mostly scientists and engineers, so material scientists, chemical and civil engineers, and most of their day-to-day lives were around setting up a safe environment and being able to, have all the parameters controlled as much as possible. So it was a different way of working for everybody. We were really going to, you know, break new ground in all ways here.
Hmm. So you guys are kicking off the project or the product, and now you're getting into sprint one. So you have the team. What was your role or accountability,
Oh,
if you were on the team?
yeah. So, yes, I was the scrum master on
Okay.
this team. So, immediately the product owner said, I want you to be our scrum master. And so I said, oh, okay.
All right. So you were the scrum master. You have this product goal. What about the stakeholders? Who are those
Yeah,
people?
stakeholders are mostly building contractors.
Ah.
And there were also some four people. Yeah, and yes, that is an actual role. Four persons. They were, mostly involved with project management. If you want to parallel that to somewhere in the, somewhere in a common industry. But yeah, so mostly building contractors and foremen, some finance people.
Was there any tension? Because when I think
Uh,
about those different personalities.
Yeah, there was tension right from the start. So we all came from different environments, different walks of life, and so yeah, I mean, I can't describe the tension that we all had going into that first sprint.
All right, let's talk about the first sprint. What did that look like? What was the sprint goal?
Yeah, yeah. So very interesting. So the first sprint goal was refine the product backlog. So
Mm-hmm.
they all decided on this during our first sprint planning. And me, as the Scrum Master, with all my years of training and coaching and everything, I immediately just said, people, you can't do that. You have to come up with something at the end of this sprint." And they chose a 2 week sprint. So I'm thinking, you got to have something. It's got to be tangible and so usable. And so I was getting a lot of pushback, and so I just reluctantly agreed. I said, "Okay, fine. This is going to be our first sprint goal." So, first sprint goal: refine the product backlog. Um, what ended up happening was it actually turned out to be something that was very useful in the end because what we ended up doing was we ended up embracing the need to prototype. So as we started to quote refine all of these product backlog items, we were able to kind of set up some ground rules about how we were going to prototype and what it meant to actually refine the product backlog. And so we kind of did that in parallel, which was actually kind of, I mean, revolutionary in itself. In that prototyping was shown to be something that you could actually make something transparent and show, hey, we're on the right track or we're not on the right track.
Because it's a piece
Uh,
of material, right? So it's kind of
yeah,
that
because
prototype. Yeah.
it was something, right? It was something that's like, oh yeah, I can do that in an hour. Okay, prove it. Well, it actually took, an hour and 15 minutes, but whatever, you got some data on it. And then I was able to say as a scrum master, well, this is kind of how we're measuring things as outcomes rather than outputs. And how was that for you? Right? Oh, well, okay, this wasn't that bad.
Huh.
So we were able to do that for sprint one.
Oh, well, so what did this, I mean, it feels like, they're like, I'll accept this challenge, but how would this have typically looked if they were doing it in the way that they do it in their normalized pre-scrum?
Okay, so really, um, we had to know how to work with each other because chemical and civil engineers, even as the developers on the team, they had a certain way of working and looking at how they were going to have their standards upheld, for example. And so they actually had to collaborate together to know how to work towards something that was usable and useful by the end. So really that was one of the things that we had to understand up front. And there was also this whole idea of what was a safe space. So we all had our own idea of what a safe space was. And that was very much needed for the engineers. And so that's when we actually decided to have a physical barrier for the developers to make sure that we had an idea of this is where we need to be able to concentrate on getting something done. Because a lot of the times the four people were really, kind of messing around with the developers saying, does it work? Does it not work? What's going on? And so we needed to make sure that we had the safe space defined.
So then I'm imagining if you have to have safe space, that previously, if they weren't using Scrum or whatever environment you had set up for them, it does sound like you were saying, they would just do something and throw it over the wall and let's see if people accept it. That's kind of what it sounded like, and then probably deal with the
Yeah,
consequences that way.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. But there was also that sense of urgency, right? Because they set the 2 week sprint for that
Mm.
first sprint, and so they actually had to know that they had to do something within 2 weeks, but they had the safety to do it.
All right. So at the end of the 2 weeks, what did you get? How did it feel? Did they I mean, I'm trying to think about like a piece of material as a prototype. What would a definition of done look like? What are all those things?
Yeah, so that was part of where we said, yeah, we did get something, but everyone started calling it the blob because it was supposed to be solid, this solid building material, construction material. And when someone held it in their hands, it was almost like a piece of putty because it would just kind of ooze into something. And so they decided, well, 2 weeks isn't enough. We're going to make this 3 weeks. So they decided to make it a 3 week sprint. But, besides the importance of prototyping, it was really a hard lesson that they needed a clear definition of done because no one, either on the team or the stakeholders, were really happy with the quality that came out of that first sprint. Yeah, the other outcome with this first sprint is that there were several people on this whole effort that were ready to leave and just quit. And really, it was our product owner that stepped forward and said, and he pulled everyone together as a team. I mean, he looked like a head coach that was just, ready to get all of his troops rallied to go out to the field. So that's really was the outcome of the first sprint. It wasn't that great, but in the end, it turned out to be a very good foundational sprint.
I mean, that's what we want from a good first sprint, isn't it? So I can imagine this is the middle of the pandemic. You guys are in some open space construction site. You're trying to build some blob. You're dealing with a lot of different personalities. Sometimes it sounds like people are poking the bear a little bit. What other types of impediments did you observe, and how did you wrestle with them?
Yeah, hey, that's a great question. Actually, I remember one impediment that actually wasn't an impediment that I call the shouting incident, where I just arrived right after daily scrum and I see them just shouting at each other in the middle of this construction site, the engineers and the building contractors. And so I get in the middle and I say, "Hey, do you people know that you are shouting at each other?" And they looked at me and one of them said, we're just working here. And so I was thinking, okay, well, I'll get out of the way then. So it was kind of a hard lesson for me as a Scrum Master to know, hey, they're just collaborating. You have to, be approached when you're dealing with impediments. It really has to be to the developers to be able to, identify what is an impediment and what is not. And I actually remember this one time on the opposite side when one of the engineers kind of put his hands in the air once and said, "Oh, we don't have the right materials to make this. This is an impediment. I can't continue." And basically taking this giving up stance. And I said, "Well, that kind of took a little bit of active scrum mastering for me, saying, look, you have to learn how to circumvent this impediment or think of a workaround. You can't just give up. That's not part of what Scrum is. You have a commitment to this goal. And so let's talk about it." So I had to actually gather everyone around and make sure that we were upholding empiricism and being able to make everything transparent. And so we actually did get around that and kind of set that precedent saying you have to learn how to go get around your impediments.
So that's
So
really a lesson in self-management for you and them. But what that made me think about was, so you have this one person, this developer, right? Because on a development team, when we're working in software, we're saying, hey, cross functionality, or everybody needs to know something and we can just teach each other. And that's not the case here, right? There's people who are really specialized and need to be specialized and certified in certain areas, that you can't just say, oh, I'll teach you some of this. And that really makes me think about how we talk about cross functionality in a team.
yes,
Uh,
yes.
so the you're talking about the daily scrum. So they're screaming, collaborating. And I remember you telling me about how they would basically what they would always inspect and move around physically was this blob. And you said that when they were doing, like, even just talking about the product backlog, they would just mess around with this piece of material. What'd that look like?
Yeah, so we ended up scrapping the blob, but it was actually a lesson in the increment, as it were, in Scrum. So uh, that was part of where we had to kind of have that as a model. So what the developers decided to do was to kind of work individually as with their own disciplines, but then be able to come up with something that could be considered an additive to uh, as the increment to the final product. So basically, what it looked like is that um, we had the increment as it existed outside, and we had two double wides that we were using. One was for the developers, and the other was for the stakeholders. We coined the developers double wide the lab, and then the stakeholders double wide was the war room. And so the lab was really set up to be a laboratory. And so that was really their safe space where they could be able to work on some stuff in the interim, kind of like we would use branches and code
Mm-hmm.
in software development environment. So that was what it looked like. And then we had a lot of testing that was done. And the way that we tested things was we actually, without going into too much detail, we surrounded our testing around ISO standards. So this was actually another part of the product effort that became kind of revolutionary, in that we used some already industry recognized standards as our testing platform, so that the ISO standard that we happen to be working on for a given sprint, for example, is how we would know that we had actually met our definition of done.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how we really tested things, was through ISO standards.
And ISO is International Organization for Standards. So it's
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. And that was the element for your DOG. So that's super interesting to set it to that level.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that there are some accrediting bodies with ISO, so we weren't able to get complete ISO certification. But the thing is that with the way that we had our iteration set up, that we could make things ISO ready, so that because we had enough cross functionality on the team and outside the team, being the stakeholders, to know that if something would meet the standard or would not meet the standard.
Okay, so non-software building construction, we've talked about DoD, you told us about the team. So you had events, you talked about, well, you talked about one event, but was there any parts of Scrum that the team just said, oh, that's not for us, or can we change this because we're not a software development team?
Well, I mean, one part of Scrum, well, the whole part of Scrum was that, and something that I tried to let everyone know is that Scrum is a framework. It is just a simple framework, and especially building contractors wanted to treat it as a contract, and they said,
They
"Well, it
love
says right
contracts.
here that you have to have a 50." No, well, yes, it does say that. I'm not going to argue with you, but there's reasons why it is like that. It's just about reducing risk and making thing and eliminating waste and making things transparent so that it can be inspected and you can adapt. So, there was that part of it that it took a lot of people some time and energy to get over that. Most of the other stuff about the Scrum framework that people didn't like were mostly just terms. For example, the developers did not want to be called developers. They want to be called engineers. I said, fine, you're engineers. Some people, we actually had a section on that of, okay, what are we going to call ourselves? And, there were several things that we voted on. We had a little dot voting section on that. So there was that. And then there was actually one part of, when I was introducing the values, and there was te- some contention, I'll just say, about some of the values. And so someone said, I can't remember who at this point, but they said, well, what if we use functionality or discipline as a value? I'm like, that's fine. I mean, all you're really trying to do is you're just trying to establish a trust bond, and going back to it and saying, is this upholding our values as a team? So that was really it. It was mostly, the contract part and then some of the terms.
I could see some people getting really deep into, oh, they didn't like the Scrum values, but I mean, you described it well in terms of terms and what do we do for us as a team and what works for them. Um, so what were some of the things we saw the differences? We've talked about some of the things that they thought were different. Were there, just for you, from coming from a software background and obviously as a Scrum trainer, and we could say even expert, what were some of the parallels that you sound like? What was resounding for you? Because this was a risk on your side as well as the client side.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there were actually a lot of similarities that I was seeing between this environment that we created here and a software environment. One of the things that became apparent was this need for a test first mindset. So basically, trying to think of the test first and thinking about quality, and always thinking about quality, and quality is always on your mind. And that was with these ISO standards that was a big turning point, definitely, in this effort, was because we always had to look at those standards. Some of the other things that I found interesting was I'd never worked with civil engineers before, but they were very familiar with being able to have an iterative development cycle and also be able to collaborate and be have a cross functionality, multidisciplinary teams, right? And so the chemical engineers had a problem, a kind of one, I'll just say, not of a problem, but more of a learning curve with that. But they were really into the risk management and compliance. So they were always thinking about, well, how is this going to affect it when a person does this, that, or the other thing? And so they brought that into the team space. I also heard some, some of the practices were kind of, I'll just say, they're test driven development. I remember that they brought up something called pilot plant testing, and that was usually something that was brought up, and this was just another, kind of a small scale kind of testing environment that would be used before it went to the larger scale, which and that was interesting because we were able to know earlier what the ISO standard was that we were going to do before the product backlog item actually got um, was actually developed, or actually, more was known as more information came in. And the thing is, we did have bug fixing too. It was just a lot more expensive because they needed to do some data analysis and modeling techniques that I had never heard of before. But um, this just upheld the whole quality standard that we were able to come up with as the sprints went on, in that we don't want to do any kind of bug fixing.
Yeah. So, well, I want to pull on that a little bit because this made me think of the conversations that I was having, and actually one of our fellow PSTs, Ben Thorpe, had posted something around this, in the notion of trade-offs in engineering, and how, we're talking about, let's say in software, there's a bug, it could affect, in his example, his story was about how he had a bug in his code, and that made like a helicopter catch on fire. And so this is really impressionable in his mind of what quality means in testing. And we're talking about, in the industry of what we see with all the technology, pacemakers and all that stuff. We're talking about materials here. And I'm sure with all these things that you're talking about, where, it's kind of like the test first mindset, that trade-off. When a lot of people hear and think about Scrum and Agile, they're just like, do whatever is good enough. Throw it at the wall. We're not sure. We'll figure it out later. Were there any parallels there where it's that struggle where, yes, we can flex a little bit on this, but no, we're trying to get things right, and we're spending a lot of money to do it. So I'm wondering if when you look at a software team, whereas when you're looking at this team, did you see any differences or similarities there?
Yes, definitely similarities. So I would say that we were constantly reminded, along with quality, that this was a foundational material, meaning that your whole building was going to be set upon this material. So everyone who was in this building, no matter how tall it was going to be at risk if the quality was to suffer. That said, uh, what did we know what was good enough? And the way we knew it is if all of us who had some kind of experience with a certain aspect of the SO standard that we happen to be working on was able to say, yes, this is ready to be certified. And we didn't know, because it takes a lot of time to certify something from another certification body to be able to be ready. But that's how we knew that, using all of our knowledge and experience, that this is going to be ready with all the tests that we happen to set up, during our experiments. I mean, one time we had which I'd never seen it before, a earthquake table to test it for earthquakes. And so I had never seen this device before. And so that was one of the things where we said, okay, yeah, it's standing up to an earthquake. As far as we know, it's ready. So the standard can be set forth for it when we come to that point.
Mm. It sounds like you're really impressed by this engagement. Are there, has this experience, how has this experience affected you as a Scrum Master, as a developer, as a practitioner?
It's well, it's actually given me, at first, it's given me an appreciation for all of the disciplines that were on this effort. I mean, I have a huge appreciation for the work that building contractors, engineers, and anyone that's involved with uh, building a building has. They actually have very little when they start. And so they actually have to do a lot of things to make it come together. But, one thing that has really strengthened my love for software is just this adherence to quality, and being able to deliver a usable, useful, quality increment at the end of the sprint is the most important thing. And another thing is the collaboration. I mean, usually I have good ideas, but they're most likely not as good as all of us together as a group. You get people who are very familiar with their own way of working, and you can come up with something that is actually more awesome than anyone could ever think of. But yeah, I think the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is that the terms are different, and all of our being a developer on a software project and a developer or engineer on this effort, the terms are different. I mean, they have different practices, different terminology, but when it came down to it, setting up a test was very important. Having collaboration, very important. Being able to do things iteratively was important. And also, some of the things that they decided they were going to automate, the need for automation became very important as well, to make sure that we were going to be able to get something incremental at the end of the sprint. So those are both fundamental in both domains. So, I had a very, very strong appreciation for all that.
Lots of parallels. Then before we wrap up, John, I'm just wondering, so I'm thinking about the listeners, and what would your advice be to someone who is trying to help a group or a team, or someone who's thinking about using something like Scrum or Agile, but they're not in the software space? What would your advice be to someone who's either, tickled with the idea or trying to tickle someone with that idea?
I would say to be able to understand what the three principles of empiricism, self-managing teams, and professionalism actually mean. And you really don't have to know a lot as a group. We didn't know anything. Um, just bring your best to the effort. And as long as you uphold empiricism, self-managing teams, and professionalism, you should do fine.
Thank you. And that would be one example of how you didn't have their experience, but you were able to guide them in their direction. I know that's a big topic right now. Do you have
Yeah,
to have all that experience and to be able to coach?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cross-functionality and cross-discipline, very important.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you, John Riley. Thank you for sharing all these details in this story. And thank you to all our listeners. I bid you a good morning, good day, and good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.